Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Daily Gossip. I know our name might usually make you think of celebrity scandals, red carpet missteps, or the latest royal family drama, but for those of you tuning in from your morning commutes in New York, your home offices in London, or a quiet cafe somewhere in Paris or Toronto, we also dive deep into the kind of global gossip that actually dictates the rhythm of our daily lives. Today, we have a story that is, frankly, the ultimate high-stakes drama. It involves billions of dollars, immense geopolitical power plays, backroom negotiations, and a narrow stretch of water that essentially holds the global economy hostage. Yes, we are talking about the recent groundbreaking developments in the Middle East, specifically the imminent agreement to secure and open the Strait of Hormuz, brokered by U.S. President Donald Trump, alongside key regional players like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, with Iran sitting right across the negotiating table. Grab your coffee, settle in, and let us really unpack this, because what is happening right now is not just another dry political headline. It is a fundamental rewiring of global power dynamics that will affect everything from the cost of your groceries to the political landscapes of Washington and Brussels. To truly understand the magnitude of this agreement, we first have to talk about the stage on which this drama is playing out, the Strait of Hormuz. For those of us living in Europe or the Americas, the Strait of Hormuz might sound like a distant, abstract geographical feature you memorized for a high school geography quiz and promptly forgot. But make no mistake, this narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is quite literally the jugular vein of the global energy market. We are talking about a choke point where roughly 20% of all the oil consumed worldwide passes through every single day. Imagine that for a moment. 1/5 of the blood that pumps through the veins of the global economy has to squeeze through a channel that, at its narrowest point, is only about 21 miles wide. Whenever there is even a whisper of conflict in the Middle East, shipping insurance premiums skyrocket, and the price of crude oil surges. And when crude oil surges, the effects ripple outward immediately. It means higher prices at the gas pump in California, steeper heating bills for the winter in Berlin, and increased manufacturing and transportation costs for absolutely every consumer good you can imagine. Consequently, this potential agreement to guarantee the security and free passage of this vital artery is a massive sigh of relief for global markets. Economically speaking, stabilizing this route is the equivalent of injecting a massive dose of adrenaline into the fight against global inflation. By mitigating the risk of sudden oil supply disruptions, this deal helps to lower crude oil prices, which in turn reduces the cost of shipping, manufacturing, and everyday living for the average citizen in the West. However, as with all things in international relations, the economic benefits are just the surface of a much deeper, more complex ocean. Let us transition into the political machinations behind this deal, starting with the strategy of the United States. Historically, since the end of the Second World War, the United States has willingly played the role of the global maritime police force. The unspoken agreement was always that American taxpayers and the American military would shoulder the immense burden of keeping sea lanes open so that global commerce could flow uninterrupted. But under Donald Trump's administration, we are witnessing a dramatic pivot away from that traditional doctrine. This new Hormuz agreement is a masterclass in what foreign policy analysts call, and quote, burden sharing, end quote. By actively bringing nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar into the core of this security arrangement, Washington is sending a very clear, unapologetic message. The days of free security umbrellas are over. The Trump doctrine dictates that the countries directly benefiting the most from the safe passage of these resources, namely, the wealthy Gulf states that rely on oil exports for their economic survival, must now pay their fair share and take primary responsibility for their own backyard. This is a transactional approach to diplomacy. It allows the United States to significantly reduce its permanent, incredibly expensive, and often politically unpopular military footprint in the Middle East. For an audience in Europe and America, who have grown weary of decades of endless Middle Eastern entanglements, this is a profound shift. It frees up American strategic bandwidth and financial resources to focus on other pressing global theaters, particularly the Indo-Pacific region. But looking at the American strategy only gives us half the picture. We must ask ourselves, why now? And more importantly, why is Iran agreeing to this? For decades, the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz has been Tehran and Oppo's ultimate trump card. It was their ultimate deterrent, a loaded gun pointed directly at the global economy, guaranteed to make Western leaders sweat whenever tensions rose. Giving up this leverage, or at least agreeing to sheathe this weapon, represents a monumental strategic shift for Iran. So, what pushes a nation to surrender its most potent bargaining chip? The answer lies in the crippling reality of pragmatic survival. Years of suffocating economic sanctions have left the Iranian economy in a deeply precarious state. The internal pressure from citizens dealing with inflation, unemployment, and a lack of economic opportunity is immense. By coming to the negotiating table and agreeing to keep the strait open, the Iranian leadership is signaling that the sheer weight of economic isolation has become unbearable. Of course, in the world of high-stakes diplomacy, nothing is given away for free. It is highly probable, almost certain, that in exchange for this security guarantee, Tehran has secured quiet, behind-the-scenes concessions. These likely involve the easing of certain sanctions to allow Iranian oil to flow back into the global market, thereby throwing a desperately needed lifeline to their struggling domestic economy. It is a classic case of trading the threat of chaos for the promise of survival. Meanwhile, as we dissect the motivations of Washington and Tehran, we cannot ignore the giant shadow stretching across the geopolitical chessboard, China. To ignore Beijing and Appo's role in this narrative would be to miss the broader strategic context. Just a short while ago, China stunned the Western diplomatic establishment by successfully brokering a historic détente between bitter regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. That move was widely seen as a massive victory for Chinese influence in a region traditionally dominated by the United States. Therefore, this new Hormuz security pact, led by the U.S., is a direct, calculated counterpunch in this ongoing struggle for global supremacy. Even though China is the world's largest importer of Middle Eastern oil and is deeply reliant on the stability of the region, the United States is essentially planting its flag and reminding the world of a hard truth. While Beijing might be good at facilitating diplomatic handshakes, when it comes to the hard power required to actually guarantee maritime security, enforce international law, and protect the global supply chain, Washington is still the only indispensable player. The U.S. is telling its allies and its adversaries alike that it is not abandoning the Middle East to Chinese influence. It is simply restructuring its presence to be more efficient and less costly. Bringing all of this high-level geopolitical theory back down to earth, we have to look at the immediate domestic political impact, specifically for Donald Trump. As we look at the political calendar in the United States, timing is everything. Securing a complex, multilateral agreement involving historically hostile nations like Iran and the Arab Gulf states is a massive feather in the cap for any administration. It allows Trump to project the image of a master negotiator, the ultimate dealmaker who can succeed where traditional diplomats have failed. But the real victory is not just in the diplomatic optics. It is in the tangible pocketbook issues that decide elections. By stabilizing the Middle East and easing the flow of oil, energy prices are expected to drop. As we discussed earlier, cheap energy is the most effective weapon against inflation. If gas prices fall, the cost of groceries falls, the cost of consumer goods falls, and the average voter feels a sense of economic relief. In the context of American politics, controlling inflation through foreign policy is an incredibly potent strategy. It transforms an abstract geopolitical victory into a measurable improvement in the daily lives of voters. For the incumbent party, running on a platform of bringing peace to the Middle East while simultaneously lowering the cost of living at home is arguably the strongest possible narrative. In conclusion, what we are witnessing with this Strait of Hormuz agreement is a masterstroke of multi-layered diplomacy. It is a story about the changing nature of American power, the desperate economic realities of Iran, the subtle but intense rivalry between the U.S. and China, and the inescapable truth that all foreign policy ultimately serves domestic political survival. It is a complex web, and every string pulled in the Persian Gulf echoes in the grocery aisles of London, the gas stations of Texas, and the boardrooms of Beijing. We will, of course, continue to monitor how these promises hold up and whether these signatures translate into lasting stability or just a temporary pause in the endless drama of the Middle East. Geopolitics is rarely settled with a single handshake, and the undercurrents here are strong and unpredictable. Thank you so much for joining me today on this deep dive. If you enjoyed this analysis and want to stay ahead of the curve on the stories that actually shape our world, please take a second to subscribe to the Daily Gossip podcast here on YouTube. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Do you think this deal will hold? Or is it just the calm before another storm? Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep bringing you these in-depth conversations. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and have a wonderful day.